10:15, and time to open up page number 2 of the morning magazine. And to help us do that, he joins us by phone, as he does every Thursday morning at about this time. His name is David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. Good morning, David. How are you?
Good morning, Manny. Great to be on with you and your listeners.
Well, we are going to kind of bounce around a little bit today, and I've been asking people this question all morning. Did you get through the government delay okay?
I made it through the government delay just fine. I don't mean to sound cavalier about it. I do know people who work for the federal government who, whose paychecks were delayed, and they all understood that they would get it back pretty quickly when it was done. But, some people who were in a bit of a bind. I don't know anybody who was devastated at all, but knew people who were in a bit of a bind for a couple of days, and I sympathize with that. That said, I think it's another example of how this country must and can easily weather some cuts to federal expenditures that we need to do.
And it is something that by no means are we done discussing either, because I guess the agreement, negotiation, whatever you want to call it, it basically just pushes this off until the first part of 2014. So we've got plenty of time to see the next chapter in this saga, I guess.
Right, and it's strange. Government at every level, passes a budget. And the federal government, until a few years ago, used to pass an annual budget. And then they could have these fights at most about once a year when they would pass the budget for the next year. And I admire certain members of Congress for stepping up and trying to use these opportunities to bring the issues of constant growth in spending and debt to the public. But whichever side you stand on, it is, and no one party is to blame here. Everybody's to blame in D.C. You just need to sit down and everybody give a little bit to pass a budget for the upcoming year or the next year after that, so that we can stop this game of brinksmanship. And trust me, Manny, as your listeners know, I do support very substantial cuts to federal expenditures, probably more than most of your listeners do. But that said, you just can't have these games of brinksmanship every few months here. You have to agree on a budget and then hopefully elect new people who want to spend less over time to reduce it in future years.
That's a good question, and in fact, it is. It's just, I guess, more or less what it's really coming down to is, and people that listen to this show, we probably do or can be considered critical at times of the president or questioning the president. But it is interesting. The one thing he did say last night that did kind of stand out to me is that you can't govern by crises, and it just seems like that's been a hallmark again and again and again over the last couple of years, and hopefully maybe people in Washington are starting to figure out that, you just can't wait to the last minute to get everything done.
Absolutely. He's right about that, but he's certainly bears a burden of the blame for it as well. The budget involves the president, the Senate, and the Congress. They all play a role. The president submits. The House is where the legislation originates. Everybody has a role in coming to agreement on the budget. The fact that they haven't done so in several years is everyone's fault. And I think that's a big part of, at a minimum, reducing these debates and fights to once a year as the upcoming fiscal year budget comes up.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see what happens as we go down the road here, so to speak, into 2014. So one thing we wanted to talk about this morning. The other thing, I told folks we're going to be all over the place. So let's come back here locally to the Lake area for a little bit. Camden County, the Camdenton R3 School District, they had their meeting, a regular meeting on Monday. And one of the things they've been discussing the last couple of meetings has been public participation, say that 5 times fast, during their meetings. And, David, they passed a change of sorts to how this is going to be handled going forward. And folks are going to be limited as to what they can talk about with the school board during what you would consider an open meeting.
Yeah, Manny, I don't think these changes are a good idea. When I read the summary of them and a nice story online, and had heard a little bit about it, and I don't think these are positive changes. I say this as somebody who has sat through many hundreds, if not thousands, of public, probably not thousands, but several hundred public meetings in my life, almost all of which have a section for public comment. And I don't think limiting the topics that these taxpayers and these residents can bring up is appropriate. One of the parts they said was they wanted to limit it to items on the agenda to protect the board members and the district for perhaps sunshine law concerns or to make sure that the board members are prepared. Well, I don't think that's appropriate. That's a way too strict reading of the sunshine law to say that you can only talk about things that are on the agenda. I mean, certainly the board can't take any type of an action at all on something that's not on the agenda. But for somebody in public comment to bring something up and a board member to perhaps respond, I mean, that's perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with that. And board members should be intelligent and informed enough to perhaps or to discuss other issues, if only in passing, that taxpayers bring up. This seems a very strange limitation and unnecessary, in my opinion.
I do know other school boards, and you do this business long enough, and you spend time covering school board meetings and the like. And one school board that I'm thinking of in particular, they have a rule very similar to this, in that public comment has to be directed just to the agenda items. And if you want to talk to the board about something else, you can write the board member, or you can talk to them, outside of that meeting. Now, there's another school board I know of. They basically if you want to talk to them about anything, what they do is they put a time restriction on it. And they go, okay, if it's on the agenda, you have so much time to talk about it. If it's not on the agenda, you have less time to address the board about it. And the board clearly states they're not going to take any action on it. They just listen to the comments and then you go on. Would that be a better situation here, where folks would have time? Maybe nothing's done, but at least people would have a chance to voice their opinion, whether it's on an agenda or not?
Yes, I mean that's an excellent way to go about it. I mean, people need to understand, if they go to discuss something that's not on the agenda, that no action will be taken, and in fact, it would be illegal to do much beyond saying thank you and we'll consider it and take it under advisement. But and there's nothing wrong with a time limit. I mean, saying that you can speak for up to 5 minutes or even less is perfectly appropriate, as long as the public comment is not overly severely restricted. I mean, if you only have one person show up to speak, you shouldn't limit them to 1 minute. I mean, you need to have a reasonable total time out there for it. And for people who go and speak for 5 minutes, I mean, you will in all of these cases have opportunity to submit written comments to sort of back up and bolster what you say verbally. As someone who testifies regularly before legislative bodies in Missouri, I mean, we always do that at Show Me Institute. We present written, detailed testimony, and then in about 2 to 3 minutes, we summarize the key points verbally. So that's a perfectly fine way to do it, and the rules you just described, I think, are perfectly reasonable. But the ones that the other school board, Camdenton here, is enacting now, I think are too strict.
It will be interesting to see. The vote was 4-2, I believe, on the change to the public comment policy. So the next meeting will be the first time it will be enforced. So it'll be interesting to see if indeed there is a lot of public comment at that meeting, or we'll actually try to work to get some comment from the school board as well. Because I think, David, they were presented with a couple different options. Is that correct?
Well, that's what the story in Lake News Online said. And one of the other objectionable, in my opinion, changes they made was that they're not going to take comment on issues that haven't gone through the appropriate channels, meaning been filed a complaint with the administration of the school and gone through that hearing. And now if you have an objection to something, they're only going to hear your comment if it's gone through that process. And I don't think that's appropriate. I think taxpayers look. You have to err on the side of openness. You have to err on the side that taxpayers and residents should say as much as they can and not try to overly limit it. And I think this school board is doing that.
We're talking with David Stokes on a segment we call here Show Me at the Lake on the Morning Magazine on News Talk 1150, 97.5 KRMS. David Stokes, a policy analyst with the Show Me Institute. All right, last thing we're going to tackle this morning, David. We have in the past, it's been a few months, but we have talked about ethanol on this program before. And it's kind of interesting because a few weeks ago, we talked with the director of the Missouri Convenience Store and Petroleum Association. I'm sure I just butchered that title. The gentleman out of Jefferson City. And talking about they represent petroleum retailers and convenience stores around the state. And they were objecting to a rule, even though it wasn't a mandate, but it was a rule that was going to go into effect later this year from the Department of Agriculture that said gas stations could sell E15 gasoline. And previously, as of right now, it's just E10, but they were going to say E15, even though car companies and other groups like the Missouri Petroleum Marketers Association was against it. AAA's against it. That was going to happen. Well, it was a joint committee on rules in Jefferson City met and is basically stopping the Department of Agriculture from letting this rule take effect. Is that a good call or a bad call by that group?
Well, the first step is a good call, certainly. I mean, they had a reason for this, saying that if this change is going to be implemented, it needs to be done legislatively and not through a bureaucratic rule process. And they're absolutely right on that. As somebody who doesn't support the rule in the first place, really, I mean, it certainly shouldn't have been done by just somebody in the bureaucracy saying you can now sell this. I mean, this is something that should be done legislatively, if at all. So they're certainly right there. But boy, oh boy, the ethanol industry has just more audacity than any group I think I've ever followed and studied. And it's crazy. I could almost agree with them on the point about E15 here, although I certainly think that when the people who make the motors and the cars say that you shouldn't put E15 in older cars, that the discussion sort of should end there. If they're saying that E15 is going to hurt our engines, then people need to know that. But that said, I like the fact that the proposal is just voluntary to buy E15. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But everything that the ethanol industry is saying about why it should be an option and consumers should have a choice, to the extent that it's true, they would walk every statement of that back if you applied it to the E10 mandate that our state has in Missouri. They're the staunchest supporters of the rule requiring that every gas sold to a car in the state have a 10% blend in it. And it's just completely hypocritical that the arguments that they make for E15, they would never agree with about E10. So you know what I say? Yeah, let's get rid of the E10 mandate, and then we can talk about giving car owners the option to buy the gas with the ethanol industry in it. There's E15 or there's E85 sales by my house where it's an option, and that's the way it should be.
I was earlier referencing the Missouri Petroleum Marketers and Convenience Store Association in Jefferson City. Ron Leone is their executive director, and that's who's been on this program talking about that. And a part of their concern as well is they really kind of felt like they were in the middle here, because if they sell this product, they had been inundated with questions already that, what was going to happen, if I put this in my car, what's the end result going to be? They had heard from vehicle manufacturers that were saying the same thing as you. If it's 2000 or older, that it could cause problems, and they really kind of felt like they were in a no-win situation.
They really are. If it's 10 o'clock at night and there's one clerk behind the counter at the gas station, I mean, how are they supposed to be? How is it fair to expect them to know enough about your car to answer your questions about E10, E15, or E85? Of course that's not fair. And my wife and I both drive cars that are year 2000 or older, so we would need to know about this stuff every time we filled up with gasoline. It's just not a reasonable thing to expect the gas stations, particularly the sort of the convenience store ones, to be able to answer people's questions. And in fact, look, the ethanol industry exists entirely because of mandates and subsidies. We need to first get rid of those mandates and subsidies, and then we can have this conversation about gas stations voluntarily selling ethanol blends. If there's a market for gasoline with ethanol in it, such as E85, some gas stations will choose to do it. And if there are newer flex vehicles where owners want to put E15 in, they should have that option as well. But first, let's get rid of the mandates and subsidies, and then we can take the ethanol industry seriously.
Well, and the other point here that again needs to be made is the fact that virtually every gallon of gas sold in Missouri now has some ethanol in it. I mean, it's the E10 blend. It's basically 85% petroleum, 10% ethanol, and then if the E15 was sold, that would be more ethanol and less petroleum. And again, that comes back to the EPA mandate that falls on top of the state of Missouri. And I think is it 5 other states, David, that are kind of in the same boat as Missouri is when it comes to the ethanol blend that they have to sell?
It's about that much. When Missouri instituted the blend several years ago, the E10 mandate, I think we were the 3rd state for such a mandate. There have been several more since, but I don't know the exact amount right now. With the National Renewable Fuel Standard, which on a side note should not be renewed. I mean, those state mandates are now meaningless, for better or for worse. So Missouri needs to get rid of the E10 mandate, and then sure, people who want it can create a market for ethanol blends and buy it.
Well, the rule has been stopped by the Joint House Rules Committee in Jefferson City, and we'll see, I guess, what happens if this debate does come up in the new legislative session, which, again, will get started in January in Jefferson City. David Stokes, a policy analyst with the Show Me Institute. As always, thank you so much for the time, for the information. We will visit again next Thursday here on KRMS. Between now and then, though, if folks would like to read more or see more about what the Show Me Institute does, please give us your contact information.
Thank you, Manny. Yeah, we've written a lot on the ethanol subsidies, mandates, and industry at Show Me Institute. We had an op-ed published in the Columbia Daily Tribune just several months ago, and you can find all of that at showmeinstitute.org or follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. Thank you so much, sir. We will visit next Thursday here on News Talk KRMS.